Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's James Tyas. I'm Senior Instructional Designer at Saffron Interactive. So in this session, I'll be talking about how in learning and development, we can use insights taken from behavioural science to help solve some of the most intractable business problems we face today. So I'll also explain about how appealing to people's rationality in our communications isn't always the most effective way of doing things. Instead, what we should be doing is appealing to people's emotions and intrinsic drivers. And I'm really excited to be able to share with you a couple of examples of how we've applied this into some of our own work. So, behavioural science. I'm really passionate about it. I want to get to people talking about it, thinking about it, reading about it, and most importantly, in L&D, applying it. Because I think in L&D, behavioural science dares us to be bold, to be imaginative, and sometimes counterintuitive in the way we go about solving problems. So at the show today, you'll also hear a lot about emerging and new technologies, AR, VR, machine learning, AI, the list goes on really. And all that stuff's great and worthy of your consideration. But I want to go back to basics a bit in what I talk about today and focus on the core of what we do in L&D. I think what we need to do is consider the fundamentals, because I think sometimes our obsession with new technology makes it easy for us to lose sight of the most important aspects of what we do, and that's the quality of the instructional design and the impact that that has on learners. So to start off with, I'm going to have two quotes up here, and I'm going to ask you to think about who might have said them and when they might have said it. So in this first one, the young now love only luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority, and show disrespect to their elders. They lounge around when anyone enters a room, they argue with their parents, interrupt everyone, scoff their food, and terrorize their teachers. The second quote, the world is passing through troubled times. The young people of today think of nothing but themselves. They talk as if they knew everything, and what passes for wisdom with us is foolishness to them. So, anyone want to take a guess at when this was said? No? Sorry, what was that? Every day by every parent. Okay. So what you'll be surprised to find is that it's not describing millennials. The first one was said in 380 BC by Socrates, and the second one was said by Peter the Hermit in 2074. So, from this timeline of magazine covers, it shows that commentators have always told us that the young generation are lazy, narcissistic, and you'll hear a lot about millennials today and how we appeal to them, appeal to this strange group of billions of people who just happen to be under the age of 30. But all this really shows us is that while technology changes, people really don't. So I wanted to share with you this quote from Bill Bernbach. He's kind of the father of modern advertising. He created the sort of Think Small Volkswagen campaign. So what he said was, it's fashionable to talk about changing man, but a communicator must be concerned with unchanging man, with his obsessive drive to survive, to be admired, to succeed, to love, to take care of his own. So I think this is as true today as it ever has been. Whilst technology has evolved and will keep evolving, we'll largely stay the same because it's how we've been evolved. So all anyone is aware of is their immediate consciousness. And whatever medium we use, that's where we need to reach them. So this is a really important point for L&D, because if we use technologies like AR and VR, but apply the same old learning techniques, it's not going to be more effective. It's going to be more expensive, but not more effective. So, how does behavioural science sort of fit into this picture? Well, it's shown us that people don't make decisions based on conventional logic. The core insight in behavioural science is that we don't think the way we think, and only a small percentage of the mental processes that influence behaviour are visible to our conscious minds. And it's shown that the ways in which we deviate from perfect rationality can be identified and specified. And this is really great because we can take what we know about that and help it to shape strategies, tools, and technologies that will help us make better decisions. So when we think about the issues of security and see it through this lens, it's easy to see how the cognitive biases we're subjected to lead to the problems we face when it comes to keeping our system secure. So only recently we've seen two major cybersecurity incidents. The WannaCry ransomware attack crippled the NHS, it locked encrypted files and then asked for payment before they could be unlocked again. The Gmail hack, the phishing scam, this was notable because it was so sophisticated, even people who think about this stuff a lot were fooled by it. And in 2005, in the case of TalkTalk, we saw the severe business impacts that security breaches can have. It cost them somewhere in the region of £80 million, and it lost them around 250,000 customers. So as hackers get better and the risks become more acute, it's up to businesses to safeguard themselves. But in doing so, the most important factors are often overlooked. They often invest in shoring up their systems, but they forget that people and the errors they make are often the most important factor. We are the weakest link in the chain. So, through a show of hands, how many of us have taken or delivered a security awareness course? No? A few hands? So how many of those, how many of you use different passwords for each and every sort of online account you have? 4 hands. How many of us use two-factor authentication? A couple of hands. So how many of us, when we see someone coming into our building, check whether they have the correct ID? So, yeah, half and half, a couple of hands. So, one of the biggest challenges in security training is that most people are aware of what we should do, but we don't actually do it. And behavioural science research goes to some way into explaining why. We're present biased. We fail to properly value benefits we won't realise for some time. If it's far off in the future, we won't be able to get it. We'd always opt to get a short-term gain. Not only this, but we're also biased to believe that just because something hasn't happened to us before, it can't happen to us in the future. This is our natural inclination. So we're terrible at assessing risk. And it's not really our fault. It's simply how our brains are wired and how we've evolved to function. So before I show you a couple of case studies, I just wanted to do a quick experiment. So I'll ask you, this is a maths question. A bat and a ball together cost £1.10. The bat costs £1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? So in the front of the row. Anyone? 5p. They've seen it before. So how many of you thought it was 10p? Be honest. Be honest, yeah, a few hands. Well, this is quite a famous example, but so many people get tripped up by it. They think intuitively that it's 10p. And I tested this in the office yesterday, and even when they were shown the result, they were kind of like, that can't be true. So, yeah, if you want to come over to the stand later, I'll show you the real reason why it is that. So, what this shows is that in our judgment, we're biased because we try and minimize cognitive effort and intuitively substitute harder tasks and questions for easier ones. So, we're naturally inclined to take the easy route. So, one of the key insights in behavioural science is that all value is relative. And one of the key, and as with a lot of things, it turns out that Shakespeare knew this before everyone else. So he said, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So humans don't judge things in absolute terms. We focus on the relevant advantage of one thing over another. And this means the way we frame choices can have a huge impact on people's value judgments. So, anyone in the audience have an espresso machine? One person? Okay. So I think the Nespresso is a really kind of genius product because marketers have known for ages the effects of framing has on our decisions. So one of the key reasons why Nespresso package their pods in single servings is so that we intuitively compare it to a coffee from Starbucks, a coffee from Costa, rather than Nescafe or other ground coffee that we buy by the bag. So by reframing this choice, they persuaded shoppers to pay around 6 times more for Nespresso than they do with normal ground and roast coffees. So to show you this, like if Nespresso was sold in half-kilo bags, they'd cost £37 each. So would any of us actually buy it if it was framed that way? I don't think we would. So this next example of framing is similar to the approach we took when we developed a security awareness course for William Hill. It was an experiment run by organisational psychologist Adam Grant. He found that the promise of helping others makes us more likely to follow rules. He proved this by putting up signs in hospitals that read either "hand hygiene prevents you from catching diseases" or "hand hygiene prevents patients from catching diseases." So the findings from this was that with the second sign, doctors and nurses used 33% more hand sanitizer and washed their hands more often. So this tells us that the prospect of helping others through pro-social behaviour is extremely motivating. So I'll show you the first clip from the William Hill Security Awareness course. So when it comes to security awareness, information alone isn't enough. We need to frame it in some way to make it more enticing for learners to change their behaviour. So providing learners with the corporate security policy isn't going to change behaviour. They're going to leave it to rot in a cupboard. So we framed security as a collective challenge where each individual within the organisation was accountable for it. And William Hill, as a service-focused business, found that making learners understand that handling data responsibly was a part of exceptional customer service. And this was extremely motivating for people in embedding a culture where vigilance around security issues is the norm. It does this by imbuing people's work with meaning and fulfilling one of our basic drivers, and makes us more likely to change our passwords, spot any hazards, and stop people when they come in through the door. So in this course we also framed the scoring mechanism as an in-play bet, because as a gaming company we knew this is what would resonate with their employees. So we worked in the analogy that as customers take a gamble when they place information in companies' hands, they have to bet themselves that they can spot all these hazards. So here they place their bet, and as part of this, when they place their bet, they have to press and hold it. So this leverages a behavioural insight known as the foot in the door effect. So research has shown that when people agree to make a small commitment in the first place, it boosts commitment when we ask a larger request later down the line. And this is because as humans we desire to stay consistent with our previous behaviour. So just by this tiny change we can have a big impact. So you might be asking, well, how does that have a big impact at all? That's kind of the beauty of behavioural science. It's proved time and time again by making tiny tweaks to the way we design systems can have a huge, huge impact at very little cost. So the government's Behavioural Insights team, in partnership with HMRC, ran a trial to test the effects of different language in letters requesting tax returns to be filed. So when they strengthened the tone of the commitment from "thank you for agreeing" to "you agreed," response rates rose from 21% to 25%, which is an amazing return really when you think they just changed a couple of words in the message. So I'll move on and show you the next clip. So throughout the course, the learners are scored, and this score system is variable, so you don't know how many points you're going to get. It also has these hot trigger notifications which come up randomly, and I'll tell you about the significance of that in a bit. So in behavioural science, there's an insight known as the motivating uncertainty effect. This insight shows that we're more motivated to reach a goal with an uncertain reward, and people are more likely to work harder and enjoy the process more. So when we designed the scoring system, we weighted the score people get based on difficulty, and we also use those notifications you've just seen. By including these elements, we create a sense of unpredictability, and this in turn creates anticipation that keeps the learner constantly on their toes, engaged, trying to see how they got that, trying to see what else they can get. And similarly, in the first example, they get a comparatively high amount of points, and that jump starts the perception of progress and instantly makes the learner more motivated towards achieving the end goal. So, moving on to the next example and feeding back into my point at the start about how sometimes, technology clouds our judgment and leads us to lose sight of what's really important. I wanted to big up kind of a solution that's not disruptive, that's not fashionable, and that's not technological, and that's the checklist. So a lot of the errors we make on a day-to-day basis are avoidable, but they're common and persistent. And the reason for this is mainly due to the fallibility of human memory and attention. So I wanted to demonstrate the power of checklists to you through two stories. So the first one's about the rock band Van Halen. So you might have heard this before. So in the 70s, every time they played a gig, they insisted backstage on having a bowl of M&Ms with all the brown ones picked out. So while a lot of people think this is just an example of kind of rock star excess and outlandish requests, it had a very serious purpose. So the truth was that it was a small clause buried in a huge contract that had hundreds of specifications. Van Halen were one of the first rock bands to turn concerts into mega productions, and these productions required a lot of equipment and a lot of people to make sure that nothing went wrong, that it all functioned correctly. So with all those moving parts, the band needed to trust that the people managing the venue didn't overlook any single detail. And in his autobiography, the lead singer said that when he went to the backstage and checked the bowl of M&Ms, if there are any brown ones in there, they did a whole line check of the production, and without fail, they found that there were other serious issues in terms of how things were set up, which could have potentially been life-threatening. So here, the checklist acted as a kind of tripwire, and in putting that in, it motivated a higher level of discipline and allowed for verification. So the second story comes from the slightly more serious domain of medicine. So in his book, The Checklist Manifesto, which I'd urge you all to read, despite its kind of boring title, is by renowned surgeon Atul Gawande, where he explained that he was asked by the World Health Organization to find a way of reducing the number of deaths during surgery. So it was quite a daunting task, but he found that most fatalities resulted from basic mistakes. And he recommended using checklists during all surgical procedures. So initially surgeons met this with quite a lot of resistance. They felt, we're highly skilled. Why do I need to use a checklist? It's all pretty basic stuff. But the results speak for themselves, because by the end of Gawande's trial, death rates across the whole hospital had fallen by 47%. So next time you think about checklists, you need to think about how powerful they are. So in this course, we wanted to include tools that the learner can take away with them and turn 30 minutes of learning into 30 weeks of action. And we included a checklist in this, but used technology to enhance it through behavioural insights. So we added in an element of personalization. So in the story, in this course, you're asked by your line manager to put together a set of briefing notes, and you do this throughout the whole course. So it kind of sticks in your memory, and then they're able to put what is most relevant to them and their day-to-day roles in a toolkit which they can download to their desktop, they can print off and use in their day-to-day life. So this leverages the behavioural insight known as the IKEA effect. So this says that we place disproportionately high value on self-made products or things that we've had some hand in creating. And it's known as the IKEA effect because with their furniture, the act of assembling it ourselves kind of makes us fall in love with it and creates this huge sense of ownership. So that's what we want to do with our learning. We want learners to put effort in and get something out of it that they can take into their day-to-day work. So before I move on to the second case study, I wanted to put in a bit of a warning, because gamification is not about points, leaderboards, badges, cartoon superheroes, anything like that. When we implement gamification, it doesn't really even have to look anything like a game. This is one of the key misunderstandings in the industry. When gamification is done poorly and doesn't align with our core human drivers, when it's predictable, when it doesn't have a desirable reward, it can have a hugely demotivating effect. So I wanted to start this next case study with a quote from Enzo Ferrari, which kind of neatly sums up the core theme. He said, "One sometimes learns more from a lost race than a victory." So when we create learning solutions, we need to understand that learning is inherently game-like. We receive variable rewards as we go along. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. And mastery is a quest. It's not a grade on a test. It's not something bestowed upon us. Learning is a process. And this means we need to be bold and create learning experiences that are effortful, that allow learners to fail. We can't be persuaded to make things easier, to dumb things down just to get good feedback on happy sheets, because it's not what leads to effective learning. When we do that, when we don't allow learners the opportunity to fail or feel challenged, we do them a real disservice. This is because the best people in your organizations are likely to be those who want to grow, who seek criticism rather than seeking praise. So this is a simulation that we built for a global bank. In this simulation, the learner is cast as the main character, and their performance impacts on how the story unfolds and resolves itself. So in this, a tsunami event has caused chaos in a fictional country, and it's up to you, as the learner, to help maintain business continuity and ensure that all the risks involved are dealt with effectively. So in behavioural science, there's a concept called the Zeigarnik effect that has shown that uncompleted tasks stick in your mind more than completed ones. This is why we can't find cliffhanger endings so compelling. So the strong element of storytelling in simulations has a major advantage because we're narrative-seeking animals. We strive to fit events into a cohesive story, and this urge to resolve any ambiguity is potent. So by framing things in a larger story, we want to know how it's going to resolve itself. We want to know the outcome. We want to know the impact our decision has. It keeps us completely engaged in what we're doing. So I'll play this next clip. So in this, we used a concept called interleaved learning. So this is when we mix up different problem types in our learning experiences. So the role of a crisis manager isn't easy, and we needed to reflect that in this training for it to have any impact at all. So in this simulation, learners are under a time limit. They need to prioritize issues they respond to. They need to practice their leadership and decision-making skills by responding to different risks appropriately. And they need to communicate effectively. to colleagues who call upon them for advice. And they need to do this all at once and under extreme pressure. So we're prone to thinking that if we focus on building one particular skill at a time, it will make us learn better. But this is proved to be, through empirical study, completely false. When we mix up different problem types, it broadens and deepens our competency and allows us to build stronger mental models. So a cricketer who practices against a fast bowler and a spin bowler, all different types of bowls in one session, is going to be much better equipped, because within that they learn how to anticipate different bowls as they would in the real experience. If one just knew, oh, I'm not very good at batting against a fast bowler, and just honed in on that repeatedly, they really wouldn't get any better as a cricketer. So the same is true of all learning. When we mix up different types of problems, we understand the sort of similarities and differences and how they all fit together. So in this simulation, we also used a scoring mechanism. So as you saw in the video, there was this crisis meter, and as you go through and make decisions, it either makes it go up or makes it go down. And that has an impact on how the story resolves itself. It has multiple endings. So this takes advantage of the theory in behavioural science of loss aversion. This is the concept that people strongly prefer avoiding losses than acquiring gains. And studies have shown that losses can be twice as psychologically powerful as gains. So by making it go up or down, it leverages this, it increases sort of engagement and motivation throughout, and keeps learners focused on how they are responding. So the final point that's notable about this simulation is that we included a point of reflection in the learning. So at the end, they have to do their final task, which is kind of putting together a report to the crisis team. So they have to focus on doing that as well as responding to all these different problems throughout the simulation. And once they've done that, the story resolves itself, and then they see how they did, and then they see how this translates into their actual competencies in the real world. They're given a breakdown based on prioritization, leadership, and communication, and then see how they all fit together. And within that, we ask them questions to ask themselves. So reflection is something that's really vital to learning. It's really vital to embedding learning and building skills, but it's something that's usually overlooked. So as well as doing this, by seeing these progress indicators, it leverages the sunk cost effect. So it shows us that we've put a lot of effort into doing this, and it shows us, where our skill levels currently lie. So when we put in effort into something, we're unlikely to want to pull out of it. Seeing this makes us want to go back, replay it, see where we went wrong, think about what we could do better, and try again. And I think that's at the heart of all learning. So before I finish up, I wanted to leave you with a few key takeaways. Think psychological before technological. Tap into learners' intrinsic motivations. Align game mechanics with behavioural outcomes. And be bold and embrace difficulty. So I've also got a reading list, which you can find out more about if you come to our stand. And if you want to learn more, I'm happy to take any questions.